What's up, Taiwan? I'm Joyce, coming to you from Taipei with the latest news. Artists and entertainers will now be a priority as Taiwan expands its investigations into people suspected of holding both Taiwanese and Chinese ID cards. The campaign comes as Taipei ramps up efforts to block the Chinese Communist Party's attempts to, quote, integrate Taiwan with China. Reese Ayers is live in Taipei with more. Reese, why are entertainers now being targeted in this investigation?
Well, entertainers now join military personnel, public servants and educators on a list of professions whose identities will be scrutinized by the government, which is looking for people who are holding both a Chinese and a Taiwanese identity document. And for those who are caught holding both, they'll have their Taiwanese ID revoked, and that's in accordance with the Cross-Strait Relations Act. Now, this latest announcement regarding entertainers, it comes from Taiwan's Mainland Affairs Council, who handle relations with China. It comes after several Taiwanese artists and influencers were kind of outed or exposed for posting pro-unification messages on social media, and another case of a Chinese influencer living in Taiwan having her residency revoked for the same reason. The suspicion is that some of these artists may have been recruited or otherwise influenced by the Chinese Communist Party in an attempt to, as President Lai put it in a press conference last week, to confuse Taiwan's national identity. And part of that recruitment process could be coaxing people who have a wide sphere of influence to apply for Chinese IDs. And Taiwan says it's all part of a wider campaign by China to influence and infiltrate Taiwan through a range of means, bringing Beijing closer to its ultimate goal of taking control of Taiwan.
And revoking somebody's national identity documents, is this a new practice for Taiwan?
In fact, it's not a new practice. In an interview with the Liberty Times, the Mainland Affairs Council Chairman Tseng, he said that almost 700 people had their Taiwanese IDs revoked in the last 10 years after being discovered to have been holding Chinese ID cards as well. But while not new, the scope of this most recent campaign does seem larger and more targeted, and will also investigate whether any of these artists have engaged with political propositions from the Chinese government, which is also a potential violation of that Cross-Strait Relations Act. And while the first round of investigations is focused, as I mentioned earlier, on entertainers, educators, the military and public servants, all people who have a wide influence, Cho said that public and private enterprises will be investigated next, which is further expanding the scope of this coordinated attempt by the Taiwanese government that it says is to safeguard the sovereignty of Taiwan.
Thanks, Reese. That was Reese Ayers live from our newsroom. Taiwan has slammed China's prosecution of a Taiwan-based publisher who sold books critical of the Communist Party. Li Yanhe, a Chinese national who's better known by his pen name Fu Cha, has been detained in China for 2 years. Beijing says he was tried on separatism charges in February, but the verdict hasn't been made public. Taiwan's Mainland Affairs Council says China has suppressed all information about the trial.
是公开把它当成宣传样板整个审判都是秘密进行，黑箱作业，一般人都不知道他所犯何刑他的证据双方答辩的这个法庭答辩的资讯，外界无从得知。那还有强调他对这个当事人的司法人权，还有辩护人的司法人权的确保，都是谎言。
Taiwan has warned its citizens they should be aware of the risks of traveling to China given cases like Li's. Now, Taiwan is reporting the highest amount of Chinese military activity around the country this year. The Defense Ministry says a total of 59 Chinese military aircraft and drones were spotted operating around the country between Monday and Tuesday. 43 of the aircraft flew closer and breached the country's Air Defense Identification Zone, or ADIZ. Taiwan's military has deployed its own aircraft and released rare images of Chinese drones flying around the country. The increase in military activity comes as Taiwan undergoes combat readiness drills, with China carrying out its own military patrols shortly after. For more on the increased military activity in and around Taiwan, our defense reporter Jaime Ocon spoke to Ben Lewis, co-founder of PLA Tracker, which monitors Chinese military activity around Taiwan.
It looks like China and Taiwan are trading in military exercises, and now we're hearing that 59 Chinese military aircraft were spotted operating around the country. Is this exchange of exercises something we're going to see more of?
I think it's probably likely that China is going to try and match Taiwan's readiness drills with its own drills. I think it's something we've seen them do in the past, kind of at a smaller scale. If Taiwan is doing like a local drill, PLA activity would be kind of more centralized around that area where they were doing it. I think it makes sense that if Taiwan is doing kind of these little Hongguang, these general readiness drills, I think it's very apt that a gray zone transition to conflict is being met with a significant increase in gray zone pressure by Beijing. What we saw today was UAVs operating around the island, doing kind of half circumnavigations. Likely, if there's activity on the east side of Taiwan, sending a UAV out to that side is a very good signal to say, hey, we can see you over here too, but also to collect that kind of practical intelligence. So I think it's always a mix. There's increasing focus on the practical necessity of we need to be training effectively on the part of the PLA, but the political component, can't be understated. I mean, it's all about signaling from Beijing.
When we analyze these kinds of incursions, different kinds of aircraft and ships and now drones, is this a new kind of military pressure that we're seeing from Beijing?
Well, I think that it's kind of an amplified version of what we've had for a very long time, which is that when Beijing perceives a political development involving Taiwan as negative, it demonstrates its displeasure by flexing its muscles around Taiwan. And so I think, the Taiwan Affairs Office spokesperson coming out and saying this is a punishment for, separatist kind of collusion with outside external parties and seemingly the United States. And then, statements made by President Lai. It's what we see every time they do a major drill. Joint Sword to 2024 A and B were related to, perceived secessionist remarks that were made by President Lai. Obviously, going back to August 2022, April 2023, again, when you see there's a clear political relationship. So I think, to have a drill of this size, or at least in this case, seemingly 2 joint patrols in one day, they have the capacity to ramp up the pressure, and seemingly that's what they're signaling they're going to do.
We've seen China really stepping up the number of incursions around Taiwan, first in about 2021 and then again in 2024. From your perspective, is this tactic working?
Since May, since President Lai's inauguration, we haven't had a month with less than 200 aircraft in the ADIZ. 200 aircraft in the ADIZ 2 years ago would have been, major news. I would have been on here talking about it. I think in terms of the practical effect, yes, it's putting a strain on Taiwan's armed forces. Yes, they've had to change the scramble policy now at least 2 times, if not 3 times. But, it also, for China, there's a practical training benefit that we know is happening. And there's also, they're cementing their position around Taiwan. Now it's not surprising to see aircraft on all sides of the island every single day. That used to be a huge deal. They've succeeded in altering the status quo.
That was Ben Lewis, co-founder of PLA Tracker. Chinese President Xi Jinping may visit the U.S. for talks in what U.S. President Donald Trump says is the not-too-distant future. China has not responded to Trump's comments, which he made unofficially at a board meeting at a Washington arts theater. Trump says he wants a good relationship with China, but he has also put tariffs on all Chinese imports. The United Nations and World Health Organization are warning that the freezing of U.S. foreign aid could soon have dire consequences. U.S. President Donald Trump has ordered foreign assistance stopped for 90 days for a review of whether programs align with his foreign policy. The UN says Myanmar is among the countries that stands to suffer, with access to medical care disappearing and famine imminent in parts of the country. The WHO says HIV, measles, tuberculosis, polio, and other diseases could all see a resurgence worldwide as U.S. funding dries up.
9 countries have reported failing procurement and supply chains for TB drugs, jeopardizing the lives of people with TB. Over the past 2 decades, U.S. support for TB services has helped to save almost 80 million lives. Those gains, too, are at risk.
The cuts to USAID are part of a wider government shakeup in Washington as the Trump administration tries to find savings of $1 trillion. Hundreds of people may have already been killed in renewed Israeli strikes on Gaza. A spokesperson for Gaza's health ministry said at least 200 people have died in the first major bombardments since the start of ceasefire 2 months ago. Israel's military says it is targeting Hamas in Gaza after talks on extending the ceasefire stalled, claiming Hamas is delaying the release of hostages. Hamas accuses Israel of deliberately sabotaging the ceasefire. Taiwan's government watchdog, Control Yuan, one of the country's 5 branches of government, says it will take massive budget cuts imposed by the legislature to the top court. Gov't reports.
It's a difficult time for Taiwan's government, facing massive budget cuts imposed by Taiwan's legislature in the hands of 2 main opposition parties. They've slashed the budget of this branch of the government, the ombudsman known as the Control Yuan, by 96%. They say it's become a toothless tiger that succumbs to pressure by the ruling party that's lost the trust of the public. But the Control Yuan says that these cuts are crippling its ability to investigate important issues faced by Taiwan society, from road safety to human rights, and that it's going to take these cuts to Taiwan's constitutional court.
整个审查的争议，其实并非是只有朝野之争，而是涉及宪政机关无法依据宪法及法律善尽的这个职责的重大议题。那机关运作几乎形同停摆，那影响人民的权益，还有国家的安全跟国际的信誉。
Taiwan government departments and agencies are facing all sorts of challenges as those budget cuts bite. Taiwan's opposition parties say they want to create a more streamlined and efficient government. But Taiwan's ruling party in the presidential office for a historic 3rd term accuses them of playing party politics and says that it's Taiwan's people who will suffer. Klein Wang and Rick Lowett in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's premier has responded to concerns about President Lai Ching-te's call to bring back military tribunals.
我们总统讲一句话，我们就要恢复军事审判，这个不是独裁吗？
当然不是，军事审判我再说明，它只有针对现役军人的5种军事犯罪：叛乱、力敌、泄密、废止职务以及抗命。军人不能有这5种行为，有这5种行为就是军事审判。
President Lai announced several new initiatives last week to address Chinese infiltration of Taiwan. Military tribunals were used to impose harsher punishments on soldiers who commit crimes that endanger national security, but they were abolished a decade ago due to human rights concerns. If the Lai administration follows through with its push for their return, any amendments will have to pass through the opposition-controlled legislature. In response, the opposition Kuomintang announced plans to put forward referendums against martial law and the abolition of the death penalty, which Premier Zhuo also responded to earlier in the day.
只有中国国民党有戒严的经验，也只有中国国民党不知道戒严的痛苦。 也没有可能在今天往后有任何戒严的可能。不要在黑暗的房间找这2只不存在的黑猫。
The Kuomintang government had imposed a 38-year-long period of martial law in Taiwan beginning in 1949. Thank you for watching What's Up Taiwan. Don't forget to visit the TaiwanPlus website and follow us on social media. Finally, we bring you to Paiporta, Spain, a town hit by last year's devastating floods, now celebrating the annual Fallas Festival. I'm Joyce. Take care and see you next time.